At San Antonio this year, we presented the results of the DESTINY-Breast02 trial. And to just give a little background on that, in 2019, we had presented the results of DESTINY-Breast01. This was a phase 2 single-arm study looking at the then new HER2-directed antibody-drug conjugate called trastuzumab deruxtecan, or T-DXd. And in that study, the DESTINY-Breast01 trial, we were studying patients who had HER2-positive advanced breast cancer that previously had been treated with T-DM1. This was a very heavily pretreated population, a median of 6 prior lines of therapy. And in that pretreated population, trastuzumab deruxtecan, or T-DXd, showed fairly robust activity with a response rate of about 60% and progression-free survival of around 19 months. So clearly it was an active drug with durable responses. And because of that study, the FDA in the United States gave accelerated approval to T-DXd in those patients with pretreated HER2-positive metastatic breast cancer. Because the DESTINY-Breast01 trial was a single-arm phase 2 study, there was felt to be a need for a confirmatory trial, and the DESTINY-Breast02 trial was designed as that confirmatory trial. So DESTINY-Breast02 enrolled patients with centrally confirmed HER2-positive advanced breast cancer, and these were all patients who had had prior therapy with T-DM1. The patients were randomized to trastuzumab deruxtecan as a single agent at the standard dose, or treatment of physician's choice, which in this case was either capecitabine with trastuzumab or capecitabine with lapatinib. And it was a 2-to-1 randomization. About 400 patients were on the T-DXd arm and about 200 on the control arm of physician's choice. The primary endpoint of the study was progression-free survival by independent central review, and overall survival was an important secondary endpoint. So the data we reported at San Antonio, which was the primary analysis of this trial, demonstrated that trastuzumab deruxtecan was superior to treatment of physician's choice in terms of the primary endpoint of centrally reviewed progression-free survival. The hazard ratio was about 0.36, which was highly statistically significant. So a 64% reduction in the risk of progression or death with T-DXd. The median PFS was about 18 months with T-DXd compared to about 7 months with the treatment of physician's choice, so a fairly substantial difference. And overall survival, which was analyzed formally because the progression-free survival endpoint was significant, also demonstrated superiority of T-DXd over the control arm. So here the hazard ratio is 0.66, so a 34% reduction in risk of death with T-DXd. And if you look at the Kaplan-Meier curves in this trial, the overall survival curves separate early, so there was already a significant difference or substantial difference in overall survival even after 12 months. And the median overall survival was about 13 months longer with T-DXd compared to treatment of physician's choice. So, clear improvements in both progression-free and overall survival. Other secondary efficacy endpoints like response rate, clinical benefit rate, and duration of response all favored T-DXd as well. In terms of the safety profile of T-DXd in this study, it was almost exactly what we had seen in prior studies. There were no new safety signals. The most common adverse events were nausea with T-DXd, and these were generally low-grade events and manageable. Hematologic toxicity was uncommon, and the one potentially serious adverse event that we think about with T-DXd is interstitial lung disease, or ILD. And in this study, the overall rate of ILD that was felt to be drug-related by an independent review committee was about 10%. So this was similar to what's been seen in other T-DXd studies, or even actually a little bit lower than what we've seen in other studies. Almost all of these events of ILD were low grade, but there were 2 patients, or 0.5% of the population, unfortunately had grade 5 or fatal ILD that was felt to be drug related. So this is just further evidence that ILD is a known toxicity of trastuzumab deruxtecan and does need to be monitored when patients are on this agent. So this study, I think, clearly confirms that T-DXd is a highly active drug in patients with HER2 positive metastatic breast cancer that had been pretreated with TDM1 and other agents. So this was largely a third and fourth line study, and clearly T-DXd was very active and quite superior to a standard of care type HER2-directed therapies. But in terms of clinical impact, I don't think it really has a large impact because we have the data from Destiny Breast 03, which was the second line study of T-DXd, which was a randomized trial comparing T-DXd to TDM1 in largely second line population. And this study was also updated at San Antonio this year, further confirming the marked superiority of T-DXd over TDM1 in that second line setting. So, I think in the clinic, these studies would strongly recommend, and this is consistent with guidelines, that T-DXd be used in the second line setting for the vast majority of patients with HER2 positive metastatic breast cancer. And therefore, our study in the third and later line setting really doesn't apply to most patients because they would have already received T-DXd prior to receiving TDM1. That being said, in those relatively small number of patients who've already had TDM1 in the second line, then clearly T-DXd is a very active drug and should be used in that patient population in the third line. But most patients really should be getting T-DXd in the second line.